I was really good at technical drawing when I was at school, but then just kind of rebelled against it and decided to do art instead. And then I went to art school because I didn't like school. I wasn't very good at it. I preferred to be sort of creative. When I was sort of 16 or 17, lost my way totally, but went to art school because I really wanted to be in a pop group. And it was obvious that if you wanted to be in a really successful pop group, you had to go to art school, because the Rolling Stones did, some of the Beatles did, the Kinks, all that kind of stuff, So that's what I had to do. And so I went to Northampton Art School and then on to the Lanchester Polytechnic in Coventry. So and then joined a real successful pop group. But no, art was always, that thing about being creative was always something that was sort of ticking away in the back of my head. I suffered at college. My pre-diploma course at Northampton Art School was very prescribed, and on Monday you did life drawing in the morning, and Tuesday afternoon you did some stuff with graphics, and then blah blah blah. When I went to Coventry, it was like, well, here we are, get on with it, off you go. And I went from this very prescribed atmosphere, this very loose atmosphere where, nobody actually said, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that right, or why don't you try doing it like this. And I just spent the first sort of year and a half sort of going, yeah, come on, somebody for God's sake tell me what to do. I eventually got with the programme, but it was kind of difficult. I ended up doing sculpture. Minimalist sculpture, because I was really lazy, and you don't have to do a great deal of work, or I didn't anyway. But I did learn how to play a bass guitar, which did hold me in great stead in the 70s and 80s. Art definitely took a back seat in the 70s and 80s. Especially when the specials went from, we were all sort of on the dole and sort of signing on and driving around in a big blue van and sleeping in it, up to the stage where we were on top of the pops and, leaping tall buildings with a single bound. Definitely, but I mean, it was still there. I remember going to New York and everybody else going out to nightclubs, and I think now I'll get an early night because I can go to the Guggenheim and the Museum of Modern Art the next day. So it was still there, but I knew what was paying the rent, yeah. Shall we say? We wanted to have a look. We were influenced by punk rock, but we were different from punk rock. We were influenced by reggae, but we were different from reggae. We wanted to have our own identity, and Jerry Dammers and I were both at the Lanchester Polytechnic. We were both interested in, well, how can we present this visually? And back in those days, it was quite easy to have your own record label, an independent record label. So we wanted our own record label with its own sonic identity and obviously its own visual identity. So we looked at the sort of the mod thing, the second-hand, the suits, and because the music was sort of ska, which was like a mod thing. So we went back to the 60s and we found this, the Bridget Riley, the op art, black and white squares. It's the simplest design in the world, so we incorporated that, and because the band were white people and black people, we had black and white. So there was a sort of I think it was a good bit of graphic design on our part. I mean, to give credit where credit's due, Jerry did the black and white thing and the logo, but I did the two with the tone and the records thing. So yes, I can say I contributed towards that. It's quite good. Travel broadens the mind, and I've been very, very lucky to be able to travel, and to see exhibits. Last year we were on the European tour, which was fabulous for me because I went to the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Hamburger Bahnhof in Berlin, and the Ludwig Museum in Cologne. And there was just some fabulous galleries. All down to the fact that I play in a group that tours. Yeah. The artists that I think have sort of formulated what I do at the present time are the pop artists, especially Peter Blake, but also traditional Byzantine or iconography. The way this has come about has been very weird. I was at art college in the 70s, apart from the sort of the beginnings of conceptualism, it was the abstract expressionists that really sort of I was very impressed by. I would go down to the Tate and sit in the Rothko room, and when I went to Los Angeles, I went to the La Brea County Museum and saw the huge Ken Noland landscapes and those massive Morris Lewis drip paintings, all this sort of stuff that were, you know, the size of a normal house. And you know, I was just amazed by the power of these great big huge paintings. Then, a couple of years later, I was in New York, like you do, and I went to the Museum of Modern Art, and there was an exhibition of work by Joseph Cornell, who I never heard of. And I went in, and he was like a surrealist, if you like. He worked in the mid-20th century, and he made these tiny little boxes with sort of collages and bits of glass and marbles and wire and things in it. And they were extraordinary, and they were some of the most beautiful, mysterious things I'd ever seen. And so it was like St. Paul on the road to Damascus. You know, I was changed from this, like the grand gesture, to this tiny little work of beauty, and that really was a kind of ground zero for art. But I love pop art because I have this theory that pop art was to art history what punk rock was to music. You know, before there were the abstract expressionists and Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman, and you know, great sort of philosophical depths to these big fields of colour, and it was very difficult for people to understand, you know, normal, ordinary people to understand these huge paintings. And then all of a sudden, along comes this bloke from Pittsburgh with a soup can, and it's like, you know, this is amazing. You know, but that goes right back to Duchamp, you know, and it's like, okay, here's a bog, which is going to be art, and it's the same thing. And that thing about elevating the mundane was great, and that's what happened in the 70s with music. There was Queen and Supertramp and Yes, and you know, the bloated rock star, totally divorced from their audience, and then all of a sudden along comes the Sex Pistols and the Clash, saying, you know, I can barely play the guitar, but I don't care. I'm going to turn it up really loud, and I can sing about contemporary, you know, being angry about being youth or whatever. And and I think the two things just are really similar. I think that's one of the reasons I like pop art as well. It was just really down to really sort of basic, real colourful, but like really striking images. And in a way, the icon thing sort of blends into that, because there is the single figure, which has meaning. With iconography, the rules of art, like the rules of music and punk rock, are just thrown out the window. There's no perspective, there's no sort of light or shade. The central figure is the most important. You know, the figure of Christ is the largest, not because he's nearest to the viewer, but because he's the most important. You know, and all that sort of stuff, which is like crazy. And I really, really like that. I have travelled to America a lot, but I think it's only been in the past sort of 15 or so years, when I haven't travelled to America a lot, where I've got interested in that. I've always loved blues, and I've always wanted to kind of represent it visually, but not in that kind of, you know, here's a portrait of Muddy Waters, you know, here's a portrait of Lightning Hopkins, you know, okay, fine. But it's like to capture the essence of the music somehow visually, and it involved collage, and it involved sort of using a process wrongly, and roughness and tearing things, and keeping the grain of wood and stuff in that. Because this music is not, it's not polite, it's not tidy, it's visceral, it's raw, and it's just really sort of in your face, and I wanted to try and sort of do that visually. The paintings start out, they're not really paintings either, which is even better. They start out as foot square boards that are worked on, and then they're enlarged twice the size. So they've got that kind of poster thing. With that sort of giclée process, you're supposed to have, the original is supposed to be really big, and you're supposed to do the prints are supposed to be smaller, to tighten up the detail, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted them to be larger than life. Then after they've been enlarged, then I'll work on them some more, and I'll put text on them and whatever. And they kind of work on two levels. There's that sort of the long distance, like view, and then you get a bit closer to them and you can see that there's all these names of all these hundreds and hundreds of musicians who have played this and perhaps never been recorded or never, you know, got record deals or anything, but just but lived this music, and they're the maps of where these people lived. Obviously Chicago comes in a lot, because that's sort of the way I like it. But they're also like birthplaces, like, you know, in Mississippi, Indianola, Mississippi, which is where B. King was born, or Natchez, where Count Taylor came from, and Gilmer in Texas, which is where Freddie King came from. So, but there's that marvelous story, the migration of from Mississippi up to Chicago along Highway 61 and all that sort of stuff. And yeah. The blues is just, for me, it's just wonderful. It's how a nation who was ripped out of their homeland, transported to what must have been another planet, and treated absolutely dreadfully, yet survived with music. And so, you know, it's a fantastic thing, the blues. It's not just, you know, yeah, it's got a good beat and the guitarist plays good. It's just something that means more than music, and I feel very privileged to be able to play it, you know, and try and represent it visually. I worry about being obviously the semi-retired pop star with too much time on his hands, you know, and paints. But whereas with people like Bob Dylan and Paul McCartney, who kind of paint and people buy their work because I think they're buying an autograph. I don't think I'm that famous, to be honest, so I would like to think that my work would stand up on its own. But I have been to art school. I do know what I'm talking about. You know, I have read the books. I have been to the galleries. You know, I am aware of the continuum of where this sort of fits. You know, when you've got your songs together, you don't just sort of sit around and wait to get a gig. You go out and you get a gig. I think it was the same thing. And I've got these paintings, I'm not going to just sort of let them, you know, just become loft insulation. You know, they need to get out there. I want people to see them like I want people to hear my songs.